This is lesson 5 of the Ruby on Rails tutorial screencast, filling in the layout. In the last lesson, we learned about the code used to include a style sheet into our application, but there aren't yet any styles. In this lesson, we'll change that by adding some custom CSS rules. We'll also start filling in the layout with links to the pages, such as Home and About, that we've created so far. Along the way, we'll learn about several powerful features of Rails, including partials, routes, and the asset pipeline. We'll end by taking a first important step toward letting users sign up to our site. To get an idea of where we're going, let's take a look at a mockup. A mockup is essentially just a diagram of what we want a web page to look like. So the details don't have to be the same as the final implementation. This is just to get a high-level overview and to give us a general idea of where we're going. So in this case, we've got a sample app logo in the upper left. We've got some links here, home, help, login. Again, it doesn't matter if these exactly match what we end up doing, but this is just to give us a general idea. And then we've got some sort of greeting, a sign up now button, and then some links in the footer. Let's take a look at what our application looks like right now. This is my standard kind of setup here. I've got a terminal for issuing commands, and then typically in this terminal I would run my test suite. So let's fire up guard here. Of course, you could just run rake test if you wanted to, or bundle exec rake test. And then in this third terminal, typically I run the local web server, or the development server. So that's just as a reminder, you should not type this stuff unless you're on Cloud 9. Otherwise, you should be doing this, just Rails server. In the process of booting up the server, we actually have taken a look here at the home page. This is the current state. So we want essentially to transform this thing into something that looks more like the mockup. Most of the changes involve things on the site layout, so let's open that up. It's in app views layout application.html.erb. And this file is fine for our current purposes, just getting started, but this is not an industrial strength application layout. It has the essential elements, of course. It's got the doc type here, which is HTML, and this is short for HTML5. We've got the HTML tag, we've got a head, body, we've got our title with the full title helper that we added in the last lesson. Then some embedded Ruby for the style sheets, JavaScript, and then this thing that you don't really need to know about, but it's protecting against something called cross-site request forgery. Part of the philosophy of the Rails tutorial is to build a professional-grade application. So that means that I include things that I wouldn't include if I were just giving you enough information to get started. So this really is the beginning in this lesson of developing the full sample application. So this is where it's really going to start coming together. We got started in lesson 3 with some basics, and then in the last lesson we took a detour and learned some more Ruby. But this is where it really starts becoming a real full-fledged industrial strength, professional grade application. However you want to say it, whatever metaphor you want to use. This is the real stuff. And in that spirit, what we're going to do here is add something in the head to improve the compatibility of our site with some older browsers, especially older versions of Internet Explorer. So to that end, I'm going to include some strange looking code. It starts like this. This is actually an HTML comment, or an opening comment, and we can put the closing one in. The syntax highlighting will tell us that we've done it right. And inside this comment, I'm going to put some code that is specific to Internet Explorer. This will be ignored by any other browser. So if LT, that's less than, so if the browser is less than IE9, then I'm going to include a script. This is a JavaScript that exists on a CDN, or a content distribution network. And this is the kind of thing that you really would never type in yourself. You would find this somewhere on the internet, and from a source presumably that you trust, and then you'd paste it in. So I'm going to end the script. And then I'm going to put the source in. And I'm just going to paste it in from the Rails tutorial itself. Here it is. Oops, I actually selected the SRC part, didn't I? So let's just put that in. And then the closing angle bracket. You should probably just copy the whole thing. It's much less error prone, but I wanted to show you some of the elements as they're built up. And then there's this thing at the end. So you were not expected to understand this. I don't understand this. This is, I mean, I can infer what it must be doing, but this is the sort of thing that you find it from a source you trust and you paste it in. And what this does is that it ensures that some older browsers will work well with our current HTML5 doc type. As a next step, I want to add the header. I'm going to start adding in this stuff here, the top of the mockup. That's not the same thing as head. It's the head of the document. But this is an actual header that's going to live inside the body tag and will actually be displayed. So we can start it like this. I'll show you several different ways to make HTML with the Cloud IDE here. Most text editors have shortcuts for making HTML. So we can start with this header, and I'm going to give it a series of CSS classes. So CSS is cascading style sheets. It's the language for determining HTML styling for browsers. And a class is just a label. It can be used multiple times on a page, and you can actually give a particular element multiple classes separated by spaces. So let's do that. So the classes here are navbar, navbar fixed top, navbar inverse. These class names are specific to a CSS framework we're going to be using called Bootstrap. So by using these CSS classes, we'll arrange for styling to appear automatically. By the way, you may have noticed there when I typed in this closing angle bracket, the closing tag appeared automatically. It's very convenient. I can also hit return and it will indent and do everything very nicely for me. So inside this header, I'm going to use a generic HTML division called div. So I can type div and then hit tab, and it will start a tag for me. I can hit return, and now I'm going to give it a class. This is a container. Again, this is a Bootstrap CSS class. And inside this division, I'm going to link to the sample app logo. That's this part up here. It's just going to be text, and we'll style it using CSS. Now, at this point, we could use just an anchor tag, right, like this. But it's conventional to use embedded Ruby, and that especially lets us use what are called named routes. We'll be talking about that a lot in this lesson. So this is some embedded Ruby. The equal sign, remember, indicates that it will actually be inserted into the template, not just evaluated as Ruby, but the result of evaluating what's inside here will be inserted into the template. And here I'm going to use the link to helper, which is a Rails helper for making links. And it takes, well, remember, it's just a function, so I'm leaving off parentheses here. We could put this in parentheses like this. But it's conventional in this context to leave them off. Link to sample app, you can see it's lowercase. We'll actually upcase that thing using CSS. And the second argument is the place it actually links to. Now we could actually do this. We could do like slash or slash static pages slash home. This would work. If we refresh this, you can see here that this actually does just link back to the home page. But that's not as flexible, and in general, in Rails apps, we use named routes, as I mentioned briefly before, and we'll be talking about what those are in a moment. So at this point, I actually don't want to put in the link. It'd be especially easy to forget to change it. So there's a convention in web design, which is to just stub it out using the hash sign. So this is a link that doesn't go anywhere. It's just a reminder that we want to fill it in with a named route later on. Now there's a complement to CSS classes, which is CSS IDs. So we could do something like this. This also lets you style it, but it can appear only once on the page. So this is something that should be unique. And in this context, I'm going to give it an ID because I only want the logo to appear once on the page. I'm going to say ID is logo. Right, so this is an options hash here at the end. We can type this. This would work just as well. So if we inspect that element, we can see that it has ahref equals the octothorpe or the hash sign, ID equals logo. So that's coming from here. But we don't actually want the curly braces there because, again, conventionally, we leave them off if we can. Refresh it, and it's the same thing. The next step is to fill in those header links. So here is like home, help, login, that sort of stuff. So that's a list of links, and I'm going to put it inside a navigation tag or nav tag. And the list of links itself, I suppose we could make an ordered list, but it's conventional in this context to use an unordered list, or UL. So UL, I'm going to give it some classes. Again, this is for Bootstrap. And then each list item, or LI, will be a link. So say LI, and then I'm going to use embedded Ruby again, like here. Use link to. So let's have a link to the home page. Oops. It's useful, you can see the syntax highlighting is telling us that there's still something missing. Link to help. Just stubbing them out for now. Oops. And let's link to the login page. This will be stubbed out for quite a while until lesson 8. And I'd like to line these things up just by putting spaces in. Looks a little cleaner. The next part of the page is just the body, or like the main body. This is all inside the body, the header here. But now this is just the page that we're yielding. And for CSS purposes, I also want this to be inside a container div. Now one of the cool things I can do here is do div.container, and we'll see that this dot notation is how you style classes inside of a CSS file. But in the context of this IDE, if I do div.container and then hit tab, it fills it in for me. It's pretty cool. Just cut it here. All right, let's take a look at it. All right, you can see we've got our links here. They're just this little list. And of course, what we're going to do is we're going to move these up over here and make them look more like this guy, the mock-up. That all happens with CSS, though. So this structure is logical in the sense that this is a list, this is a link with an ID, and then there's this material in the middle. So as long as we've got this logical structure, where we've got the right tags, we can make it look different using CSS. Of course, we haven't touched the actual home page, so let's take a look at that. Again, that's in app, views, static pages, home.html.drb. Oops, I clicked on the wrong one, didn't I? There we go. Okay, here's the sample app homepage. Let's start filling this in. I want to put this inside of a div, and I'm going to use some Bootstrap classes. Let's do class equals, I'm going to center it, and I'm going to use something called Jumbotron. Kind of funny. And then let's say, this is going to say welcome to the sample app. And I'm going to put a second level heading. So there's an H1 there. Let's put it in H2 as well. go. And let's make a link to that sign up button. It's this here, sign up now. And I'm going to stub it out for now, the actual link. But I'm going to give it some classes. Now we saw here that we could define an ID using this key value pair, this options hash. So again, we can do ID equals and then something, whatever we want it to be. In this case, we're going to put in the CSS classes, also using a key value pair. So this is class, button large, button primary. And I'm going to put all of this stuff inside this Jumbotron center. Put it in here. And I like to indent it just to indicate the structure. So if you highlight it and then tab, it'll indent it. And finally, I want to show you how to link to an image. And I'm going to use the Rails logo itself for this. So let's do that. This is outside of the div. So to link to an image, you use image tag. And in this context, if I were to put the name of the file, which as we'll see is rails.ping, now this is looking weird because we've got a link to and then a spaced image tag and then a space. And in some contexts, you'll actually get an error message or a warning message. So it's good to leave off the parentheses. Typically, this is a very idiomatically correct line of Ruby or embedded Ruby. But in this context, it's a good idea to add in the parentheses so that it's not ambiguous. So there's an image tag, and then image tags have an alt attribute. This is the alternative. This is what gets displayed, for example, for screen readers for the sight impaired. So let's do alt. Just call it Rails logo. Closing it there. And then this is the thing we're linking to, and then we also need the actual URL. So you can see, well, maybe you can see it, there's this subtle line. I really don't like going beyond this AD columns if I can avoid it, so I'm going to put in a new line here. There we go. Let's take a look at our page. So you can see all the elements are there except for this image. It used to be that the Rails logo was included with Rails, but now we have to download it separately. And this behavior is browser dependent, so on Chrome it just shows a little broken image. So I'm going to grab that image off the web. There are a bunch of different ways to do this. You can just visit the URL I'm about to show you and use your browser. But I'm going to use a really cool command line facility called curl. This lets me hit a URL at the command line. I'm going to download it with -o. -o. I always get this wrong. Is it 0 or O? It's curl-o. And then this is the URL. It's rubyonrails.org /images/rails.ping. So this will download that file unless I got the 0 or the O wrong. There we go. It is -o. Let's take a look at what this is. So you can see here on the left, it downloaded it, but that's not the right location. So the right location for images is an app asset images. You can see it's empty right now, so we're just going to move it there. Move rails.ping to app assets images. And you might wonder, well, where's app assets here? App assets images? It's not anywhere. It's just the name of the file. And the answer is image tag takes care of that for us. So as long as we put this image in a place where Rails can find it, it will find it. And if we refresh this, we should see it. There we go. There's the Rails logo. We can inspect this to see what its location is. You can see that it's in /assets/Rails and then this crazy string, .ping. This crazy stuff is put in by Rails. This is essentially a way to make it possible to force browsers to refresh their caches. So if we were to change this image, for example, this string would change, the string of digits and letters. So this is just a little trick. It's not important though. One of the nice things about using Rails is it takes care of all those sorts of details. This is a good start, and with the structure that we've put in and the CSS classes and IDs, we're going to be able to style this with the Bootstrap framework and with some custom CSS of our own. Rails uses a CSS framework called Sass, and there's a Bootstrap Sass gem that was already included as part of Lesson 3. We can get started using it by creating a custom CSS file of our own. And in fact, it's going to be a custom CSS and Sassy CSS. This is the format that Sass uses. Actually, Sass supports 2 formats, but this is the one that looks more like regular CSS. So what we want to do is make a file called custom.css.scss. You can do that however you want. The place you do it is in app assets style sheets. But I like using touch, like this. This is especially convenient when you have this somewhere and you can just copy, say, from the Rails tutorial book. Probably would have been faster actually just to right click over here in this context, but anyway, it should be working now. Let's refresh it. Where is it? There it is. We'll be talking more about Sass later in this lesson, but this SCSS extension tells Rails that it needs to run this file that we're about to fill in through the Sass preprocessor. So let's open it up. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by importing some of the Bootstrap framework. The way we do that is with @import. There's a facility called Sprocket, and we have to end this with a semicolon. And then we import Bootstrap itself. Again, it's really not important to know where these things come from. I mean, I got these from some documentation website somewhere. And now you're getting them from me. And let's put in some styling here. This is universal styling that will apply globally to our application. So the HTML tag, I want to do overflow Y, scroll. This is the kind of thing that you really want to get a designer to help you out with. But in this case, I've already had a designer go over the CSS and make it look okay for the sample app. And actually, before even putting these in, let's comment this out like that. And let's actually see what this Bootstrap did for us. See if it did anything. We might have to restart the web server. This is a universal algorithm. If you try something in Rails and it didn't work, then you should restart the web server and see if it does. Ah, that worked though. Look at that. But that's a lot. Look at that. We got a huge change just from including Bootstrap. So this is a really promising start. We've got, this isn't styled, but we've got this bar at the top. We've got these links. We don't have a button yet, but this is really good. So let's go back to our styling. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I'm going to make a section. It's certainly not a bad idea just to copy these from the Rails tutorial, because this is not a web design book. I'm going to type these out just in case there's something I want to comment on. But this is not a core part of this tutorial, so you can feel free just to copy and paste. And some of these are actually in anticipation of future things we're going to be doing in this tutorial. They actually won't do anything immediately. Size vertical. So dot center here, this is the center class. we're going to add some rules to the center class. So we had this on the home page. Right? So this center class is going to be styled by this dot center. So let's take a look at this. Going to text align center, and then an h1 inside a center class, so that's this. This is inside a tag that has the center class, so this h1 we're going to style. Give it a margin on the bottom, 60 pixels. So this is a pixel. I don't even really know what some of these things do. Like, I probably just grabbed them off the web somewhere. A lot of web design is like that. But I really do recommend working with a professional designer if you're going to make any real app. Refresh this and see what it looks like. It's looking pretty good. There's something surprising here. Actually, I think that this button should be working, and I'm not sure why it's not. So let's take a look at that. I was right. There actually is a typo here. Maybe you noticed this when I made it. This is button, button large. This should be button primary BTN. Because this is actually part of Bootstrap, and if I save this and then refresh, it should work. Take a look at this right here. There we go. Look at that. So we can replicate what we did before. We can just go to here and comment out everything we've added. Right, and this is the pure Bootstrap. So this is just the Bootstrap style. So I was right that this button should have actually been showing up with this styling. So that's great. Next up, I want to add some rules for typography. And in this context, I really do feel like it's not important to go into the details. So I'm going to copy and paste from the tutorial. So here it is. Let's just copy this here. Paste it in. Line height is just the height between lines, as you might guess. There's a font size, spacing between letters. The negative indicates that it's closer. This is for an h1 tag, h2, and this is for the paragraph tag. This is a hexadecimal color, 777. Let's save that and see what its effect is. It's looking nicer. And finally, I want to add some header CSS. In particular, we're going to style this logo here. Let's do that. So here it is. This is the header CSS. Recall, let's take a look at the header. Recall that we have an ID right here for the logo. That's what this is here, this hash sign logo styles an ID. So if you want to style a class, it's dot center. If you want to style an ID, it's the hash sign logo, in this case an ID of logo. So there's a rule that for floating it, again, there's a hex color. This is actually RGB. This is the same as FF, FF. So this is red on a red or green, blue, and FF is just white. So this, or is maximum. FF is maximum for this in hexadecimal. So if you max out each of red, green, and blue, you get white. And remember that I mentioned that we would use CSS to make the logo uppercase. That's this here, text transform uppercase. Let's save this and see what it did. Great. Now we can compare it to the mockup. You can see that we've got everything on this page except for the footer, which we'll be doing momentarily. We're going to add the footer using a Rails facility called a partial. So let's get started by using partials to clean up this application layout, which is getting a little messy. There it is. So a partial is a way of taking some HTML or embedded Ruby and sticking it in a file by itself, and then we can render the partial on another page. So for one, it's a way to reuse that HTML. We're actually not going to use it for that purpose right now. We're just going to use it to clean things up. So let's take a look at this. I just want to get rid of this. This is called an HTML shim. That's a term from carpentry. It's a thin little wedge of wood. It's used in other industrial contexts, and it's come to mean a little piece of software that sits between two things. In this case, the shim is making our application more compatible with older browsers. But for some reason, people have taken to using the word shiv interchangeably with shim, and shiv is a completely different thing. A shiv is a weapon typically associated with prisons. So I'm going to name my partial shim instead of shiv because that's what makes sense. So the way to create a partial is this requires creating a file. I can do this here. And I'm going to call this shim.html.erb. And in order to indicate that it's a partial, I'm going to prepend an underscore. So this is a file convention. If you see an underscore on an HTML ERB file, it's a partial. And the way that we can use that partial here on the application layout is by rendering it using embedded Ruby, using the render method. And then we just say where it is. It's in layouts, shim. Save that. So you can see here that the location is relative to the views. So Rails knows it's in the views, and then you do layouts and then shim. Also notice that you do not put the underscore when you're rendering it. That's just a convention. Next, I want to put the header in a partial. So let's cut this, and it's going to look like this. This is a situation where you can save it and then verify that your tests are failing. You can see that there are 3 errors here, and that's because there is no header partial right now. Even though we're not specifically writing tests for this HTML structure, the tests are still useful to catch things like this. So remember the convention, underscore, and then whatever we want to call it is called header.html.erb. You can paste in the header, and I like to dedent it. This is just Shift-Tab. There we go. And there we go. Now our test suite is passing again. Of course, we can look in the browser too. Let's refresh it and make sure it's doing the same thing. And there we can see it's still working. So let's make a footer now. By the way, you can see that I'm putting these in the layouts directory. That's because these partials are really part of the layout. There's another convention which is to use a shared directory under views. We will be using some shared views, but for things that are shared across the layout, I like to use the layouts directory. So let's make a footer. Now that we know about partials, we can preemptively make it a partial. Remember what we want the footer to look like. Should have some links at the bottom here. Now I like to use the footer tag like this, but for Bootstrap we also need to give it a footer class. Let's see, I'm going to put this in the small tag. These are going to be small links here. This is just going to be small text here. So let's say let's do this. Just have a link to the Ruby on Rails tutorial. And then let's put a link to my page. And then let's have some nav links. This is the same tag we used for the header. Let's do an unordered list of list items. And okay, so what are these going to be? Let's just use the ones from here, about, contact, and then news. So about is going to be link to about. We don't have a route for that yet, so let's do that. Stub it out. You can just copy this. And let's do help. Actually, no, contact. We actually don't have a contact page unless you solved the exercise in lesson 3. So that's working. And then I want to have a link to the Rails tutorial news page. All right, save that, and it should be working. Because we haven't rendered it yet, so let's render the layout here, the layout footer. It's going to be after the content, but before the end of the container div. So let's do this. Layout slash footer. And let's see if that works. It should work. Aha, there we go. So it's here at the bottom. But you can see that it doesn't have any styling, so that indicates that we need to add some CSS. So I'm just going to copy that. Just copy the footer CSS here. By the way, you might have noticed that some of these generate commands, I guess in this case the static pages controller generate, actually generated a static pages.css.scss file. It turns out though it's really quite hard to tie everything together. So rather than trying to figure out how to get all the CSS to work, for this tutorial I'm just going to put everything in this one custom file. I really don't feel like with an application this small it's worth breaking it apart into separate files. But there is a way to do that if you need to. Let's paste this in. Let's take a look at what this is. So this is styling the footer tag here, this guy. So this is all styling the footer tag. So you can see that this CSS, this custom CSS, is styling the tag footer. The class footer is going to be styled by Bootstrap. In fact, it probably already has some styling. Yeah, so it's already inherited some styling from Bootstrap, I think. In any case, let's save this and refresh it. And there we go. There's a nice footer. Got the couple links here in the bottom left, and then some more navigation links about contact news. But you can click on these and you can see that the URL will change just to put that little stub in. But of course it doesn't go anywhere yet. At this point in real life I would probably make a commit, so let's just do that. I feel like we haven't made any commits yet. Set everything here and say by the way, you might have noticed I did -am here. This A is unnecessary because I just added everything in the previous line, but my fingers want to type this, so, and it doesn't do any harm because we've already added everything. There we go. Now that we've got a handle on this basic CSS, I'd like to talk about Sass, this more sophisticated way of dealing with CSS, and the Rails asset pipeline. So it used to be that Rails would store any sort of assets in the public directory, which still exists for some purposes. You can see it's here. But as of Rails 3.1 and later, there are 3 directories for assets like images, JavaScripts, and style sheets. So the main one we'll be dealing with is an app assets, but there's also lib assets. This is for libraries that you write or your development team writes. And then there's vendor assets for third-party libraries. In this tutorial, though, we'll be focusing on by far the most important of the three, which is the app assets directory. One of the things that the asset pipeline does for you is combines all of these different assets into single files. So for example, if we look at the application style sheet, you can see this line here, require tree dot. So this notation here, all of this here is just a CSS comment. But Rails is actually interpreting this part here as code. What it's doing is it's requiring the tree, which is to say it's requiring everything in this part of the file tree. And then it's requiring itself, which means basically anything in this file. So one of the cool things about the asset pipeline is that it automatically packages everything up for efficiency in production, while also running any of the files through necessary preprocessors. So for example, we're going to be talking about Sass in a moment. This custom.css.scss file right now includes just plain CSS, but we're about to add some Sass. And so it's important in that context to run the Sass preprocessor. And the way that Rails knows to do that is because of this file name extension. And so what the asset pipeline does is it takes all of the things in the style sheets directory, for example, and combines them into a single file in production, which is really good for efficiency, because when you want to deliver these files over the internet, it's important that they be as compact as possible and all in one file. It's a lot faster if everything's combined together. The same thing goes for JavaScripts. So the asset pipeline is smart and puts everything in one application.js file when you're running in a production environment. Now looking at this custom CSS file, you might notice there's quite a lot of duplication. You can see here there's footer A again, footer is repeated here. So we just have this footer over and over again. We've got dot center here, dot center h1, so that dot center is repeated, and so on. You might also notice that we've kind of hard-coded these colors. It'd be nice if we could make this easier to read by eliminating some of that duplication and giving these colors some names. In that context, we can use what are called syntactically awesome style sheets, or Sass. Because this is an SCSS file, we can just start using Sass right away. I mentioned this duplication .center here. So what I want to do is eliminate that duplication by getting rid of this part here. And Sass supports nesting like this. So if you put this h1 rule inside .center, Sass knows that the .center class applies to this h1. So if we save it, it should be the same. It certainly looks to be the same, and there are no syntax errors. Otherwise, we would have gotten an error page there. If we scroll down, we can see that there's some duplication here with the logo. This is a slightly more complicated case, though, because let's see if we tab that over. You might see inside here, we'd like to be able to do this, but this will not work. In fact, let's save it and verify that. Huh, looks like it did work. That's weird. Just actually make sure that there's something happening here. Let's change this to red. This is one of the things I like doing in CSS, is just to make sure that it's picking up the change by making some obvious change. Yeah, so there's something weird going on, because you can see it actually didn't change it there. Why did that not work? Okay, so if I eliminate it entirely, it works. I mean, that actually shows that something is happening here. So if I save this. Okay, so look at that. It actually does work. I didn't realize this. So there's a shorthand for this, though. Rather than repeating the ID, we can just replace it with the ampersand character. So this ampersand refers to whatever the parent element is here. In this case, the logo ID. So we can verify that this still works. And you can see that there's quite a lot of repetition here in the footer. And I'm just going to paste that in because doing this by hand is left as an exercise. we go. See if it still works. Great. There's something else that Sass gives you. It gives you variables for colors. And so in this context, I'm actually going to replace some of the other things too. So this color can be replaced with light gray. Oh, so this will actually give us an error. Let's double check this. So this 777 is a light gray color, but in fact, light gray doesn't exist. So I just want to show you how to define a variable. So we can go to the top here, and we can define it to be 777. Now it should work. There we go. But it turned out this is actually built in to Bootstrap. Bootstrap doesn't use Sass natively. It uses an alternative framework called Less. But there's a way to convert from Less to Sass in this context very easily. So we can convert less colors, or less variables generally, to Sass variables. Let me show you how to do that. So there's a link here. Follow the link in the Rails tutorial. I'll try to keep it up to date. This does go stale every once in a while though, which is kind of annoying. So you can see that we don't actually have light gray, but we do have gray light. And in less, that's at gray-light. And the way to do that in Sass is just to replace the at with a $sign. So let's go here. Rather than light gray, we can change this to gray light. This is nice because we can reuse this here. Let's look for other occurrences of 777. Just replace them. I could replace them using search and replace too, but there aren't that many of them. I think that was the only one. And then, oh no, why does this not work? This should have been red. I never changed this back. Oh, it's the hover. That's why. Here we go. Hover. Okay, well, so maybe before. Let's take a look at this. I said that it didn't make a difference. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this actually doesn't work. So this this notation that I was surprised worked, it actually doesn't work. Because you can see here the text decoration none, that's getting rid of the underline, but you can see the underline is there. So this is working. Aha. Yeah, so now if I hover, I get red. That's what this is. So let's change it back to this. Yeah, so now it doesn't do anything when you hover over it, which is appropriate for a logo. All right, well, I'm glad I got that fixed. All right, there's another color here that I want to define. I want to define this 555. That actually comes as part of Bootstrap too. This is just gray. And then this is gray darker. Let's take a look at what else we've got here. And then there's one more gray color. I'm going to name this one. This doesn't come as part of Bootstrap. I'm going to name this gray medium light. Define that up at the top. These are variables and other things called mix-ins. So let's take a look at this. Paste that in, and then gray medium light. Save that and see if that works. Great. And there's one more thing I want to change. I'm going to change these FFFs to the name of the color. This is actually part of CSS. This has nothing to do with Sass. You could actually just do this. And I mean, look, FFF is really common, so people will know what it means. But I feel like white is even clearer. There we go. Great, so this is our refactored custom CSS file to use Sass. So now we've got a variable, and we've used some of the built-in Sass or Bootstrap variables that have been converted to Sass. By the way, that happens inside here. That happens because of the Bootstrap Sass gem that we included. Sass can do a whole lot more than I've shown you in this section, and we'll be talking about some of its other capabilities later on. But this is a good start. We can see even just with the variables and nesting, we've significantly simplified our CSS file. At this point, we're ready to start defining some of the layout links. You can see here on our mockup, home, help, login. Although actually, it's working now. We don't have to look at our mockup anymore. We're done with this, really. Let's look at the actual page. Here it is. So home, help, login. So login we're not going to have for a while, but we are going to be able to do home and help, and then about, contact, and well, news is already just an external site, right? This already works because it's the Rails tutorial news site. But so we want to fill these in, about, contact, home, and help. Now adding a contact page was left as an exercise in chapter 3 of the Rails tutorial book. So before moving on, I want to solve that exercise by adding in a page for this contact link. We'll add that in exactly the same way we added the about page. So let's recall how we did that. The first thing we did was write a test. So test controller, static pages controller. So let's write a test for this here. Actually, let's switch over to guard. All right, oops. Here we go, contact. I pasted the test into the guard area. I don't think I've ever done that before. Let's just make sure it's green. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to add this. Contact, contact, and then contact here. Should be red because we don't have such a page. Remember, the first error is that there's no such route. So let's open the routes file. And just follow this model. Really should rerun the test suite when I change the routes file. Right, there is a rule for the routes file. I see it's just running the integration tests. We should just run all the tests. And do this here. Routes potentially touch everything in the system. Here we go. So now I change the routes file and we're red again. It's because it says it can't find the contact action. So let's open the static pages controller. Add in the action, and now it's going to complain that there's no template. Right. Missing template. So we can go to app views, static pages, and we just need to make a new file here. And why don't we copy from the help page? It's going to be pretty similar. So this is contact. Contact the Ruby on Rails tutorial about the sample app at the contact page. Let's just do this. It's really the contact section. But you get the idea. Save that. Should be green. Excellent. Let's double check it. Should be in some static pages. Okay, looks good. Now that we've added the contact page, we're ready to start using some named routes. And we're going to have to define some, but we actually have one already. So let's take a look at the routes file. Here it is. So this line here, the root static pages home, gives us a named route. So let me show you what that means. So where was this link? It's on the site layout. So here it is. Oh, it's in. So it's rendered on the layout, but it's actually in the header. So let's look at the header. There we go. So here is the link to the sample app. We want this to be to the home page, and to this right here, and similarly here. So it turns out that the way Rails works is that if you define the root route like this, you automatically have access to a named route called root path. The way you use it is it's just Ruby, so you can put it in here inside this embedded Ruby and paste it in there. And now let's take a look at our page. Oops, I almost clicked here. It's not going to work though. It's not defined yet. It's about to work. Actually, it would have worked if I'd refreshed the page. So let's inspect it. So you can see here that there's the logo href equals / That's what root path gives us. Here. There's a closely related helper called root URL. Let me do that and save it and refresh. You can see the only difference is that the root URL is the whole fully qualified URL. So with HTTP and all that stuff. I will generally use path, but when doing redirects, the HTTP standard actually requires a fully qualified URL. So in that context, I'll use the URL named route. But here we can use root path. And now I'd like to define named routes for the other pages here in the routes file. And in the context of making that change, I'm also going to clean up this file considerably. So first of all, we don't need this anymore because we now know how to use root path. Notice the subtle difference. This is the hash sign. This is a / like a separator in URL. So in this context, this is the controller. This is the action. So we're not ever going to use this here. So what I'd like to do is convert these gets in order to have named routes like help path, about path, contact path. And the way to do that is to just give this an argument like this, and then use the hash rocket. Here, oops, I'm missing a string here, single quote. And I'd like to line these up so they're a little prettier. And at this point, we don't need the rest of the file, so let's just get rid of it. Now you might have noticed that our test suite went red there, and that's because there in fact is an error. This is one of the reasons you have tests. The reason it's failing is because this notation here doesn't take the path like this with a /, but instead follows the same convention that the root route does, the root path here, which is the controller name and then the name of the action. So if we save that, it should be green again. There we go. Great. So we've seen how to use one of the named routes in the context of the root path right here. Let's use those other ones that we just defined. In fact, let me split this up here. We don't have any links here, do we? No. So we've tucked away all of the links in the header and the footer. So I can close that down. So now that we've got this here, this line in the routes, we can change this here for the help link to help path. Login we're not going to define yet. That's going to be lesson 8. So look at the footer. About is about path. This comes from right here. And then, as you can probably guess, this is contact path. There we go. Let's take a look at our app. And if I click around, that's the home page, help, about, contact, back to home, back to contact, back to home. Looks like it's working. Of course, it's nice not to have to click around all the time to make sure that our links are still working. So what I'm going to do as a final step is write a test for the layout links. This is our first example of what's called an integration test. It's an integrated test of everything that's going on in our system. They're really powerful and will be one of our main tools for testing Rails applications. Let's get started by generating a new test. So let's look at this here. The way we make an integration test is with Rails generate integration test, and then the name of the test. So this is going to be an integration test of the site layout. So let's just call it site layout. If you look at the output here, you might notice that Rails automatically appended this underscore test. So we gave it an argument, which was the name of the test, and it said, well, we know this is a test, so let's call it site layout test. So let's add in that test. Move this over here, and let's take a look at all right, it's not showing up. That's an indication that I need to refresh it here. There it is. Split it. So this is our generated test. Let's just get rid of this here. I'm going to say test layout links. And the method actually, that lack of indentation was a sign that there was something wrong. This is a block. It's test do. There we go. All right, the way we're going to test this is to basically replicate this process. So if I go to the home page and I inspect it, I can look around and say, oh, well, does the link and the header work? It's like, is this right? So here's slash, this is the root path. I can say in here, there's also the root path right here. Here, this is the help path. So what I'm going to do is write a test that checks to make sure that these anchor tags, these A's, are present on the page and that they have the right hrefs. So let's start by issuing a GET request to the root path. You can see we can use the named route here in the test. And just as a sanity check, I'm going to make sure that this actually renders the home page. This is a test of this association here. The way to do that is with assert template. And it's the static pages controller / home. So this is not the same notation. This is not the hash sign. This is just the path. So if I save that, it should be green. We're actually writing this test after the application code. So at all points, when I make any of these changes, the test suite should be green. If it goes red, it means I've made a mistake in my test. Either that or there's a mistake in the implementation. But this should be green the whole way through if the implementation is right and if the tests are right. The next step is to use the assert select method, which we've seen before. Let's take a look at static pages controller test. This is assert select. This is the title tag, and then it verifies that the contents of the title tag are correct. We're going to use a slightly more advanced variant of assert select. So let's look for the root path. So what I'm going to look for here is an anchor tag, and I want to actually test the href. And the way that assert select works is that you can say href equals and then have a question mark inside of, so you have put this inside of these square brackets, and then you give it the URL you want to test. So what it'll do here is it'll just insert this root path into this question mark. We'll substitute it. It actually does some escaping, so this is better than interpolating. And in fact, I think interpolating doesn't actually work right now. Let's save this and see if it works. So that's green. I think this used to work, and then it stopped working. Oh, it gives me a deprecation warning. So I don't know if that will still be the case with you, but in any case, it's better to do it this way with this question mark because it handles escaping automatically. So let's look at the other assertions. We can just copy this. They're all going to be very similar. all of this stuff is exactly the same in here. All this is exactly the same. We're just gonna change these guys. This is help path. So the other ones are about path, and root path here is contact path. So if we save this, it should still be green. There we go. So what this is doing is testing to make sure that the links up here are right, that this is here. And actually, we're actually not testing this particular link. That's really a question of how much detail you want to put in, because if we change this, we could break the application. This would still work. Right, it's still going to be green, because what this test here is picking up this this path here. It says, oh, there is a root path somewhere on the page. We could actually tell it that there should be two of them. And now it's red, so we could actually do this here. In fact, that's nice enough. I think I'll put it in the book. We'll actually be using this count later on, because if you want to show that there isn't such a path, if you want to make sure that this doesn't appear, one way to do it is to put count 0 here. All right, now that we've got an integration test written, let's just run the full test suite to double check that we're green, and we are. And just as a reminder, you can do this at the command line too. If we want to run just the integration test, we can run bundle exec rake test integration. And if we want, we can rerun the full test suite, just getting rid of this part. Having an integration test like this is a great way to catch regressions later on. If we happen to make a mistake and change something on this page, this test will catch it right away. At this point, our home page is looking pretty good. It's really coming together. We've got some styling here. We've got links. Click around, I think. There we go. There's one last thing I want to do in this lesson, which is to take a first step toward letting users sign up to our site. In the process, we'll get this button to work. This will involve creating a sign up path, which will link to the action for creating new users, which in turn will render a new users template. As a result, the first step is to generate a controller for users. Just as a reminder, we've got this controller here. We have a static pages controller and then the application controller that came with Rails. Now we're going to generate a users controller. Controllers are plural, so this is users. And then I'm going to include new on the command line to indicate that I want to create a new template along with the controller. Take a look at what that did. There's the users controller here. I'd like to put this new line in. And then there's a test, users controller test. It just gets new and then asserts the response as success. Let's fire up guard. And we can look at the template that got generated. Oops. There we go. So this is just a stub for the page to make new users, that is to say the sign up page. And we're not going to fill it in yet. That's the task of lesson 7. But we are in a position to make a route. So let's do that. Let's go to our routes file, config routes. You can see that the generate actually created this here, but we don't need this. Just going to get rid of it. We're going to say get sign up and send that to the users controller, and the new action. Now we can go to the home page. That's where that button is. And we can replace this with sign up path. And I also want to make a custom page here. Let's provide a title. Sign up. All right, and take a look at this. If I refresh this, now the link should be working. And there we go. By the way, if you think it's a good idea to add a test that the sign up link is working here, or rather that the sign up path is correctly defined on this page, I agree, and that's left as an exercise. This is a great start to our sample application. We've made some major strides in this lesson. We started with something that clearly could not be mistaken for a real application and ended with something that, at least on the surface, is starting to look pretty good. The rest of this tutorial is dedicated to actually making this application do something useful, which will involve creating a data model for users, allowing those users to sign up, log in, log out. Then we'll add an association for user microposts, and finally we'll add the Twitter-like capability of following other users. At this point, I'm going to make a final commit and then push up the code to Bitbucket and Heroku. Let's do that. We'll run the test one final time, just make sure we're green. We are. That's good. Let's add everything. Finish layout and routes. Merge in the topic branch. And we can push it up. And deploy it. Let's check it out. And there we go. All right, next step, modeling users. And after that, getting sign up to actually work.